With Mike Fraser, the head scout of the Everett Silvertips. We're here to talk a little bit about the 2020 WHL Bantam Draft. Mike, it's been about a week since the 2020 WHL Bantam Draft. You've had some time to reflect. You look back on last week. How do you feel you and your scouting team were able to do?
Yeah, I think it was obviously the circumstances were a lot different this year, but I think we did quite well to bring in a lot of new future Silvertips, and it was a little bit of a wait for us not having a pick until number 81. But even so, even later in the draft, we still had a lot of guys that were higher up on our list still available. So we definitely ended the day feeling pretty good about ourselves for sure.
You talk about the 81st pick. You take Hoyt Stanley there in the fourth round. What is it about his game that really jumped out at you and your group?
Well, the one thing with Hoyt is that a lot of the guys in our scouting group got to see him a fair amount this year, and he just seemed to get better every time we watched him. He's to me, he's kind of an all situational guy. He can bring some offense, but he also knows what he's doing in his own end. Plays very steady on the defensive end, and the one thing I really like is there's a lot of game growth there. So I think he's still a long ways away from reaching his potential, and we're excited to see what that potential will be in the future. But he, from where he was in September to where he is now is he's come a long way, and we really like what he's going to bring to our back end.
Now, you mentioned this off the top. Obviously, you didn't have a pick until 81 there. That's not necessarily normal circumstance coming into a draft. So a little bit of a different year for you, I'm sure. How did that impact the approach, or how did it impact upon the preparation for last Wednesday?
Well, I think ultimately it doesn't do much for the preparation. I think it's fair that maybe in your mind you've got a group of however many players that you might think might be there when you're picking. But I think in the end, and I've learned this a long time ago with some of the people I've worked with in the past, is the most important thing is getting your list right. And doesn't matter if you're talking about number 1 or number 231. It's really important to go through that process and to make sure it's in the right order. So really a lot of the legwork was done before. Once we got to April 22nd and draft day, it was for the most part who's next on the list. So you might deviate from it a little bit if you're looking for a forward or a defenseman in a certain portion, but other than that, in terms of the preparation, there wasn't much difference. The important thing is just follow your list and be confident with it.
Now, from everything that I've heard, and it's been echoed by a lot of people that we've talked to over the last week, this seemed to be a pretty deep draft year. Now, even though you're waiting until the fourth round to make your first pick, you still end up making, I think it was 12 selections. So you still do a great amount of work from the fourth round on. So you look at some of those later rounds, what jumped out at you that you were able to accomplish there? Or what were you happy about with the rest of your draft class?
Well, I think as the draft went on, we acquired that second, fourth round pick, which was really big for us because we didn't have a pick yet again until the seventh round. So getting that second, fourth round pick and being able to pick Rowan Woodward, I think really, we were able to get 1D and 1-4, which we were all real happy about. And I think I mentioned before too, is once we got later on in the draft, we still had a lot of guys that were fairly high up on our list. So Gary Davidson, our general manager, did a great job of kind of acquiring an extra pick or two in I think it was the 7th and 8th rounds. And it just helped, still able to pick some of those guys that were still on the higher half of our list. And to your point, this was a very good age group. This is probably one of the better age groups I've seen in the last 5 or 6 years. And so that maybe helped us a little bit too, even though we were picking later on, there was still some, in other years, some of those players would maybe go a little bit higher. So there was some depth there, and we're pretty happy with how it turned out in the end. And that's why we felt confident taking some of those guys that late, because it was just that deep of a draft.
You mentioned Rowan Woodward. He's your other fourth round pick. Anything in particular about his game that really excites you?
Well, he's an exciting player. I think he's got a lot of offensive instincts in his game. He's very creative, very quick, and has very good offensive smarts, and that's the type of player that we like with the Silvertips. So I think he'll fit in. We drafted a lot of smaller, quick forwards last year, a lot of skill and speed and smarts, and I think he'll fit into that group real nicely.
So obviously the Bantam Draft itself as an event is one day, but there's a whole boatload of work that goes in advance. And then there's work still to be done once you get through that day. So what's next on the calendar for you and the rest of the hockey operations staff with the Silvertips?
Well, it's, obviously everything's a little up in the air right now, so it's hard to know for sure. I know Gary and Alvin Backus, our director of player personnel, and myself are talking a lot just about what's next. We're trying to plan for training camp, but we're not sure how to do that quite yet. So, we have a lot of ideas and everything else. And I think the biggest thing right now is we've all tried to contact our newest draft picks and some of the prospects that will be coming into camp this year and get them ready with training programs and things like that. So that's kind of the next step for us. Hopefully we get to experience a bit of a break here as well, and maybe some summer. We'll see how things work out. But for now, I think it's there's so much work that goes into that day last week, and obviously different circumstances this year. We were all doing phone conferences or web conferences and everything else, and our guys did such a good job. And I know a lot of teams were like this too, where you're so used to having those provincial camps at the end of the year, but I think our guys did a really good job doing all the legwork so that we were ready, and there was no panic or anything like that when everything got shut down. We were very ready to go and excited with who we selected, and now we'll move forward and look forward to hopefully training camp here in the fall.
You've mentioned that you're reaching out to a lot of your players and having conversations with them over the phone. This is a question that I've asked everybody, and I'm always curious to hear what some of the different messages are. But when you're having those conversations and you're talking to those young kids who are, they're looking forward and trying to make the right next step to continue their development, continue progressing, what kind of message do you deliver them to make sure that they're set down the right path?
I think ultimately it's just to be ready and, soak it all in, but also realize once you get to training camp, it's kind of a clean slate. So I know for me personally, by the time training camp comes around, I won't say I forget where everybody gets picked, but I mean, it really doesn't mean much, in the end. Like I know it's an exciting day for the players and for the scouts and everybody involved, but, whether you're, like I said, whether you're picked first or 231st, once you get to training camp, you're all in the same boat, and it's your chance to shine and impress. So, and it's exciting for the guys that are coming to training camp for the first time, and the same thing goes for players that weren't drafted, that go to training camps and get that experience at Western Hockey League training camp. I think that's real important for them to see and experience. And as we know, there's a lot of players that play in our league that were never drafted. They develop later, or you just never know what's going to happen. So they're still going to have lots of eyes on them moving forward here, after Bantam, and it's a great chance for them to see what the WHL is all about too, and it's important for them to be ready for the fall as well.